You mention the doctrine that all people are created in God's image and are thus entitled to be treated with compassion, which is a major tenet of Judaism. What does Tzelem Elokim entail, and how does it implore us to take action, especially in regards to justice and compassion?
Well, Tzelem Elokim is, again, one of the most important concepts of the Torah. And that's stated at the outset in Veneration. And I don't think people in the world appreciate this. Is, again, another contribution that Judaism has given to the world, because that means to say that man is different. Man is different than all other living beings, different than the animals that do not possess a Tzelem Elokim. That means, in addition to the instinctual makeup of man, there's a separate element, which is kind of like an image, so to speak, of Hashem. Not in a literal sense, but it means there's something in man that partakes of Hashem, that is the capacity for understanding. That God created a world, and the world is filled with ideas. It works according to laws and precision. And there's an element in man. Man is the only being that has the ability to conceptualize what these laws are and to use them to his advantage. That's what accounts for all the progress. There's no animal that has any real progress that's developed anything. It's only man. Where does that come from? Take a look at how the world was a few thousand years ago and how it is today. Could we have ever, who would have dreamed, say 100 years ago, that we'd be having this conversation? I'm sitting here in Israel and you guys are in America, and we have a screen and we're talking to each other. It's like we're in the same room. It would have been insane. That's a tribute. That's a tribute that the Hashem created the world, that these laws that make this possible are there. They're discoverable, and he puts something in man that when he opens it up and uses that, he can discover these things and use it to his advantage. That's the significance of man, that he's a reflection of the Creator. And that leads to the result that you have to treat each human being with respect, because he's a reflection of the Creator. He has that potential. He has that capacity. You can't treat him like an animal. It's a very, very important point. Judaism respects all people. We don't look down, so to speak, on Goyim. We don't look down on blacks. Any kind of, that whole thing, what people disparage because of races, making fun out of people and all of that, or even making fun out of gay people. Okay, so homosexual behavior is prohibited by the Torah. Okay, but that doesn't give you a right to make fun out of a person. If a person happens to be gay, first of all, there's no sin in being gay. I want to make that clear. It's only certain behaviors that the Torah has prohibited. The person is gay, that's his nature, but he doesn't act on it in that way. He hasn't violated anyway the country. He's a big tzaddik. He's a righteous individual. But I'm saying to make fun out of that person or any other person because of anything like that, what we would call accidents. He's black, he's Asian, and so on. He has Tzelem Elokim. That's his essence. That would mean that behaving in a racist type of a manner would be a violation of the Torah, because you're violating the Tzelem Elokim factor. So that's an extremely important concept. I don't know that the world appreciates that. That today it's kind of like accepted, not always. It's okay to be anti-Semitic, but the other types of bigotries, but they don't really give the full explanation behind it, why that's the case. And certainly they don't, this should be another reason for thanking the Jews, because the Jews gave you the Torah, and that's part of the Torah. So that's a very, very significant thing. That's the basis of our sanctification of life. That's the basis of our prohibition of suicide. And the reason why you're obligated to live a healthy life, you have to take care of the body, and so on and so forth, because of Tzelem Elokim. You have an obligation to live your life in a certain way that you fulfill the will of God in creating you. He didn't create you to be an animal. He created you to live a certain type of a life, which makes sense, given that your essence is to be a Tzelem Elokim. That calls for a certain way of life. And Jews have to be in the forefront of demonstrating that way of life. That's how Jews become a light unto the nations.
Beautiful.
Very nice.
Okay. So in the chapter called Tragedy and Triumph,
you point out that the Torah does not provide much information about the personal aspects of our great leaders in terms of their physical appearance and emotional makeup. Why is that the case, considering that many great non-biblical works of wisdom utilize those aspects to paint a picture of their heroic figures?
Well, I think that the reason that the Torah acts this way is, again, because you see, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. We need these great leaders as role models to look up to. But how are we supposed to relate to them? Not to make heroes, not because of personal charisma, not because of a certain style that you're emulating, but rather to learn the ideas that they live by. So if you had a picture and you had more info about you're going to get attracted to the personality of Avraham, perhaps. That's not what the Torah is interested in. We're not interested in his personality, whether he was funny or not funny. That's not the point. The whole point is to recognize the principles that he lived by and to internalize, to seek to emulate. And it goes through, it's very, very rare that you have figures that the Torah is depicting in a way that you wouldn't write a novel this way. If you're going to write a novel, you're going to emphasize all the features, his thoughts, how he dealt with this issue. And so a personality is going to emerge. You're going to get a picture of the hero. The Torah is not giving you that. It wants, because again, it's not that. It's not like you should, I don't think you can really, it's very hard to develop that kind of a feeling for the biblical heroes. I mean, the deeds, you can appreciate David HaMelech having the courage to take on Goliath, and other things that he did. And then the very same Torah is going to tell you that he sinned grievously in the matter of Bathsheba. Yeah. Whoa! If you wanted to,
it messes with your projection.
Yeah, my goodness! Just when you thought it was safe, like great. Oh no, I can't believe that. I can't believe that. How could it happen? How could he do that? And then what happens? The Navi comes and gives him a dressing down. He had to give him a parable about a man who was very wealthy and so on and so forth, and his neighbor was very poor, and he took that one and he got it. He said, "Oh, that person should be killed." And then the Navi said, "Atohish, that's you." And he got it. Oh, he realized. So you see, if that's what you're looking for, it's very, very hard. See, because the hero, the heroic figure of the novel and so on and so forth, is depicted in terms of the positives, but not in terms of doing something like that. There's cover up. That's why, you see, it's very disturbing in the yeshiva world today and so on and so forth. When corruption occurs, there's the cover up. And that creates a greater Chil Hashem. Okay, but you see, in Judaism itself does not believe in the cover-up. If you go back to the Torah, you go back to David HaMelech, the Torah was not covering it up. But if you have that idea of this extreme sainthood, so what do you do when reality gets in the way? So then you got to be dishonest and you got to manipulate the facts. So that's my opinion, that the Torah is not giving you personalities in that sense. It's giving you again.
I just wanted to say, based on what you were just saying, I remember that I was talking one time I was telling my brother about Shaftai Tzvi. I was talking to him about Shaftai Tzvi, the whole debacle and everything, and a fellow synagogue member got very upset with me. Why are you bringing up such a negative thing? Like, why are you talking about such a dark period in our history? Like, what is the point of doing that? Like, why would you say that? Like, people don't like to hear anything negative about anything, especially when it comes to Judaism. Like, to criticize anything in Judaism becomes like very taboo, very like, only say the good, only mention the good things, only mention the positive things, and God forbid we talk about our failures, God forbid. And I think that that's the point you're trying to make.
No, that's an excellent point. It's part of the magical thinking, right? If I don't acknowledge it, it doesn't exist. It does exist. It's like a very childish, right? Everything revolves around me. Okay. So you can't say anything negative. If I say it, then somehow or other it's going to happen, and so on. That is a childish way of thinking. It's not realistic. It's not the Torah way. And it's necessary to bring up. If you don't bring up the quote unquote negative things, then how are you going to make corrections? Then they say they're legitimate because nobody ever criticized them, and so on and so forth. So you're perpetuating falsifications.
We have to learn
And
from the failures as well. We cannot just talk about, the saints and just learn off the saints. We have to also look at the failures, and we have to be able to learn from the mistakes. It's part of how we grow.
And just a further proof of that, just turn to the Seder Hayom of Tisha B'Av, and you go through the keynotes, and then you go through the stories in the Gemara in Gittin. The story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and the Chachamim were there, and they didn't intervene, and you see that the Gemara is looking back and saying, that he should have asked for this. He should have. Mistakes were made. Why have Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av is about all the failures of the past, all the tragedies that were visited upon us, and all the failures. And why do you have to mention them? Because we're not there yet. We have to correct our flaws. We have to discover what our flaws were. We have to correct our flaws. We have to face it. But if you're starting off with that premise that everything is good, we're all tzaddikim as long as we pretend to be, then you're not going to get there. You're just going to repeat the same things over and over again.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's two things I want to point out on this, and I want to ask maybe your advice on this, but what would you tell people who have maybe like the Das Torah mentality that there's the tzaddik who's perfect in our generation, and they're almost like saints, and they're beyond reproach and beyond questioning, because that seems to become a phenomenon in the last, I don't know, a few hundred years, where now like rabbinic figures are almost perfect. And you talk about the Torah leading us towards perfection, which is obviously an impossibility, but it's a derech, right? It's a path. What would you say to people who, what are you talking about? They didn't actually sin. And to make this point even stronger, they point to, let's say, for example, when we question the avot for their sins, or the commentaries also criticize them. They'll say that it says in the Gemara that David HaMelech didn't actually sin in that case. He was there. The Gemara is trying to defend, David, and say, oh, but Uriah was really a Chiti, and he was Mored b'Malchut, and all these different reasons why he wasn't actually a sinner, when in fact the word that he said is Chatati, I sinned. So how do we deal with this kind of pushback from the Frum today?
Well, first of all, it's very important to understand what the Gemara meant when it said that whoever says David HaMelech sinned is Toeh. And the same thing with Shlomo, that he married so many wives, and that led to Avodah Zarah, because when he got older, they pressured him to build these houses of worship in Yerushalayim. Now, he didn't do Avodah Zarah, but he allowed it. The Rabbi Chet one time explained that what the Gemara means to say, let's take the case of David, when it says that whoever says he sinned, it means to say that he didn't violate things. You can't imagine that David HaMelech, who was the Mashiach Hashem, just broke the halacha. I mean, he saw a married woman and he was attracted, and he just brought her over and had relations with her. You can't. And how would they let him get away with that? I mean, that's a serious error. But they explained that from a halachic point of view, she was permitted to him because the soldiers used to give divorces before they went off to war, and so on and so forth. So that's what they meant. He didn't violate the halacha. Okay, and maybe that's why he had a certain sense that it was all right. The Navi comes and condemns him. So why would the Navi, if the intent of the Gemara was to say that he didn't really sin, so why would the Navi come and condemn him? And why would he say Chatasi? Because it meant from the moral point of view. This is a very important teaching. The mere fact that you can find a heta for something, that something is not halachically prohibited, doesn't mean it's okay to do it.
Yep.
You could do the worst things. You could cheat people in business. The halacha is structured in such a way that there's always, if you're smart enough, you can get around it. Mm-hmm. And you could do the terrible things, but you didn't. Okay, I'll show you the halacha. It's only that doesn't make it moral. In fact, it's much worse, because when you act like that, it's a chilul Hashem. Wow, this person is manipulating Jewish law to permit him to do all of his perversions.
Wow.
So what the Chachamim are actually doing is they're trying to tell you that it's deeper than just a blanket violation. It was something that he could have talked himself into, and they're trying to teach us that nevertheless that is a sin.
That is sin.
Yeah.
That's exactly that harmonizes the Gemara with the Tanakh. The Tanakh is saying sin, very serious sin. The Gemara is saying no. Oh, because they're coming from that angle. And the lesson, the takeaway is that just because something is mutter, halachically, doesn't mean you're allowed to do it, and you could be doing the worst possible errors in the world with a hechsher. I mean, it's what the Ramban has this concept of manuvel b'rshus HaTorah. Yeah. Someone who lives disgustingly with the permission of it. That is to say, you could be a playboy and you could have these lavish feasts and drinking and parties, and even women. There are ways that a person can have lots and lots of women, sexual gratification, and they didn't violate halakha. That is a maneuver. Just because it has a seal of approval, just because there's a hechsher on it, doesn't make it a mitzvah at all. That is the and unfortunately, you do find that trend also. You do find that trend as Jews have become wealthier and more prosperous, and you see excursions, Passover tours going here, there, and there's tremendous excess of food and wine, and it's the Kiddush, even in the Kiddush clubs, that became a phenomenon. And no, you can't just drink regular scotch. Now it's got to be there, and it's got to be single malt. And you see that trend to indulge. And the more we're able, because we have more availability of foods like pizza. I mean, I remember a time when there was no kosher pizza. Okay. And I'm not coming out against it. I'm just saying that illustrates the idea that there's a lot of things that are available today. Jews have access today to all the pleasures of the hedonistic world. This is an important lesson around Hanukkah time. Now, Hanukkah has begun here in Israel, and the Hellenists versus the Maccabees. And what does Hellenism represent? What kind of a way of life is that? And have we fallen prey to a certain extent to that whole way of thinking and that whole way of living? Are we sort of trying to incorporate a little bit of that into the structure of our Orthodox life? These are very, very important things to ponder.
Absolutely. So what do you have to say about the trend, let's say the Hasidic movement, where they venerate the saints? Like, what would you answer to that approach, like of looking at these
Rebbe's?
Yes.
I think that's, I don't want to speak about any particular group.
Of course not.
Hasidim that keep the halacha, keep the mitzvos, and they go to their Rebbe because they get wisdom and so on and so forth. That's fine. But where it reaches the point that he's not a human being anymore, and there's veneration, and he's a miracle worker, I think that's contrary to Judaism. I don't know that there's no such thing as a miracle worker. Okay, the miracle workers today are those that the scientists and doctors that discover these cures, but they're using rationality. It's not a magical thing. So I think they save many more lives, right? They save many more lives, and they can put a man on the moon and so on and so forth. I don't think a miracle worker can do that. I don't believe because man doesn't have supernatural powers. We're created beings, and we have natural. We have natural to the extent that we use our intelligence, our talents, etc., to manipulate the laws of nature, which God has given us the ability to do. To that extent, there's progress. In terms of man, Moshe Rabbeinu, did he do great miracles? No, it was Hashem that did it through the agency of Moshe. So I'm not saying a Rebbe, theoretically, somebody can come along and he could do miracles, but that not because he has any powers. It's only because then it would be that Hashem spoke to him. So then he'd have to prove it. Where's the proof? When Moshe went down to Mitzrayim and he had for 7 days, he was arguing with God. He didn't really want to do it. And finally he says, okay, so I know that you told me the name of God to tell them, okay, but they'll say, they won't believe me. I need proof. So Hashem gave him signs. Hey, he took the staff and it turned into a snake, and then his hand with the leopard, and then the water and so forth. If they don't believe you for these two, here's another one. So Moshe was saying they're not just going to accept it. Oh, really? Moshe Rabbeinu, if he claimed that he had powers, miraculous powers, they would say, prove it. That to me indicates that you're not obliged to accept the fact that somebody, well, that's the truth if a person claims to be a Navi. Every other religion, if he's charismatic, they accept him. Judaism, the Rambam goes through the whole thing.
Rigorous. It's a rigorous trial.
Very, very rigorous. You can't
Very
prove,
rigorous.
and there's a danger. You're gonna label yourself as a false prophet. You have to prove it. First of all, you have to be at an extremely high level of perfection and so on and so forth. Secondly, we want proof. So before Matan Torah, according to the Rambam, you had to perform something which is contrary to the laws of nature, a miracle. And after the Rambam holds that after Matan Torah, they demanded that he predict certain things, not just once, a number of times, and it has to come true 100%.
Yeah,
His
this reminds
prediction.
me of the James Randi experiment.
Yeah.
Where you know James Randi?
I think so. He
Famous
said he could
skeptic,
debunk
yeah.
any
Yeah.
magician.
He offered $1 million for anyone who can prove that they have a supernatural power. He offered $1 million. How many people ended up trying?
Many people tried it and everyone failed.
Never. He actually tried to test this, and it didn't go very well for them. But
What I find interesting, I tell people, it's kind of like, even you see among Jews today, it reminds me of the time of Eliyahu Navi, where the people were simultaneously worshiping Hashem and also Baal, right? So why was this happening? Because they want to cover their tracks. So it's kind of like today where people,
hedge their bets.
they'll go to like a Kabbalist
Hedge their bets.
to they're hedging their bets. They'll go to a Kabbalist to keep them healthy, to make sure nothing bad happens to them. But the moment they're suffering a heart attack, they're not driving to the Kabbalist. They're going to the emergency room to go to the rational people, the doctors.
Yeah.
I have the same thought here in Israel. I mean, the Haredi population in Israel, they get tremendous support from the government. And that's an issue. I mean, it causes a lot of resentment. In fact, they just gave a raise for soldiers in the army, and then they demanded like a similar raise for the Haredi fellows that sit and learn Torah. So, okay, fine. But at the same time, there's not the slightest expression of gratitude. They will not have an Israeli. They won't say Mishaberach for his Chayalim. Are you serious?
Yeah.
These fellows are out there. They're most are nefesh. They're protecting you, and you wouldn't even say Mishaberach. That's too much. That amazes me. And I wonder. Oh no, because they maintain the idea that we're protecting. Our learning is protecting the country. Okay, I'm not going to start. Fine. But if God forbid there is an attack, so who do you call? Do you call some yeshiva guys to sit and learn, or do you call the soldiers? Come on. That kind of an approach, that attitude, though, aside from that, that's part of the problem. That's why ordinary people, secular people, are totally turned off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can you respect this? This is the religion. This is what God has given you. People that behave in this way. Okay, so don't take any money then. You're not going to say thank you. Don't take the money. Don't condemn the. I mean, it's the state. The money is coming from the state, from the taxes of other people whose sons go in the army and fight and protect you, enable you to sit and learn, enable you to go to the kotel.
So true.
The zealousness that's being employed it's sometimes even inhumane. It's mind-boggling. How could that be that we don't appreciate our soldiers? Like how? It's truly incredible how we've gotten to such a point. It's mind-boggling.
And I don't believe that does not to me represent the true ideal of Avraham Avinu and the Avos and the Gedolim and Rav Moshe Feinstein, and up to this day, the genuine Rav Soloveitch, the genuine Gedolim, would never approve something like that.
Absolutely. And for the last question, in the story of Yosef and his brothers, which happens to be where we're at the moment, you make the statement that it illustrates the unique nature of the Jewish people and the secret of its history. What is it about this story in particular that you feel so strongly about it? And what does this teach us about optimism and faith?
Yeah, I mean, there's many aspects. It's probably my favorite story in the entire Torah, and I've given so many shiurim on that. It's endless. But just to focus on something, there's tremendous hope when you think about it, what a low point they represented the Jewish people at that point in time, what a low point they had reached, the misunderstanding, and they were prepared to kill Yosef, and just the last second, okay, we won't kill him, they'll take him out, they'll settle. sell him as a slave in Egypt, which pretty much means his life is over in terms of him achieving anything. And you see the rise of Yosef. Yosef was not destroyed by that. You think about that. You're 17 years old. You've just gone through this thing with your own brothers. And now you're in a strange country. You don't even know the language. And you're a lowly Ivri where they look down upon Jews. And wouldn't you just fall apart? That's what the brothers thought would happen. But he retained his amunah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he retained his composure. And he did not allow himself. He names one of his children after that God allowed him to forget. You see, you got at that point in time, if you can't forget, if you can remember, here it is, it's Friday night, just remember Friday night, I'm with my family, I'm at the table. You can't function. He was able to put that aside and live in the present and work his way up. And with the help of Hashem gave him the opportunities. And then he fell into jail again with the incident with Patriarch. He never lost that emunah in Hashem, that belief that if he acts properly and he retains his relationship with God, the situation will improve, which it did. And then he goes on to great heights. He goes on. Then the second aspect of the story is he's now like pretty much the ruler of all of Egypt, the ruler of the world, basically. And now he encounters the brothers again. And he forgoes any attempt to get even, to take revenge. Whatever he did because he had to do those things to bring them to Shuvah. But when the Shuvah of the brothers was accomplished, he reunites with them and he forgives them. He is the hero of forgiveness. The ability of that family to come together again after that division, that is so inspiring. The ability for Yosef to overcome whatever anger he might have and to forego revenge and instead to embrace them. And I'll come down because of the famine and I will support you and sustain you. That is the most inspiring thing. That gives us hope. That's what hopefully will happen in that Yemos HaMashiach, that the Jewish people will finally come together. Will finally come together and recognize the truth of Torah and be able to get over all of the petty divisiveness that separates us. That's, as I said, there's many aspects to the story, but those are the highlights, which I find extremely relevant and inspiring.
Rabbi Sachs, I think in Covenant and Conversations, I think he says that the forgiveness that that Yosef has for his brothers, he frames it as the first act of forgiveness ever recorded in human history. Literally the first act of forgiveness ever recorded in human history. It always stuck in my mind. That chapter, he differentiates between forgiveness and maybe different types of reconciliations. But it's such a powerful and incredible story. I think that it's also, the story of Yosef is something really important when it comes to our kids. It's a very relatable story. It's a story that, kids can really learn from in a much more direct way than maybe some other stories that you have to a little bit peel out the layers. This one is just so it hits, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it has all the drama.
Exactly. It has all the drama.
Parental favoritism, sibling rivalry,
right?
Envy, and so on and so forth. It's really, I would say of all the stories, this one is more appealing, I would say, to ordinary curiosity and ordinary human interest and so on and so forth. I agree.
It's extremely the end when he reveals himself to his brothers. It's such an emotional scene that very few places in the Torah where you actually get moved. You're moved. You're brought to tears almost.
That's exactly. Excuse me, but exactly. I remember when I was a kid. So I went to Yeshiva Torah Das elementary school when it was still in Williamsburg. I don't know if you're familiar with Brooklyn. Most of the Rebbes were from old school Europe, and they were very harsh. You'd get corporal punishment and so on and so forth. But we had this one Rebbe in third grade. He was the sweetest individual. He was more like the modern, Rebbes. And every Friday, now imagine, I didn't know the stories of the Torah. This is my first time being exposed. And I think he called it Jewish history, but every week he'd give the capsule of that parsha. So I really got caught up. He was a great storyteller. And I got caught up, especially in the story of Yosef and the brothers. And they sold him. It hit me every week. And then, installments. And I was looking forward to Friday. And what's going to happen to Yosef? And then, what happens? And he becomes the looter. And then the brothers are coming down. And Yosef is there. And I'm assuming that it's all going to be reconciliation. Oh no, what's he doing? Why is he acting strange? And then further, this, that. And finally, when that scene, I burst out crying with that scene. I remember as a kid.
Wow.
That's the impact as a little third grader in yeshiva. That's the effect it had on me. Maybe that's the reason why over the years it's become that story of Yosef and the brothers has become such a rich source, like constantly studying and looking for new nuances and ideas.
Amazing.
Rabbi Mann, we are honored to be able to be a mouthpiece towards the wisdom that you're sharing, and we appreciate so much the time that you took to be able to do this with us. Have a Shavua Tov, and Mazal Tov
for your son.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't know if it's appropriate if you do this. If you could say, maybe show them the book and say a couple of words about the book. And I have others that are available. Or if you don't do it, it's fine. I'm just.
The book is at his house. We're at my house.
We're at his house. But if you want, you can plug your book as well. So let me just let's just pause for a second, and then I'll say. Okay. So before we go, your book, Eternally Yours, you want to tell the audience about. There we go.
Yeah, this is a collection of my Divrei Torah on all of the parashiyos of the Torah. So right now we have on Bereshis, that's the one, this is the one on Bereshis, Shemos, Vayikra, and Bamidbar, and we're working on Devarim. So that's not available yet. If you like this approach, I take a lot of care in terms of writing there. You've read them, yes. They're very readable.
Very.
And you could turn to any parsha, and I think you'll find it enjoyable for teachers, or you want to say something at the table, and so on and so forth. So they're available on Amazon. And again, Eternally Yours, God's greatest gift to mankind. And on the bottom it says, Torah's enduring relevance for a life of wisdom. And this one is on Bereshis. So if anybody's interested, they're not difficult to get.
And I'll say this about it, because there are some books on the Parshiot that are like very, very, complex and very difficult to read sometimes. Academic. This to me was so good because I can read it straight to my children and it's palatable. It's something that they can digest. Your way of expressing things very simply, like where Judaism demystifying is to take complex issues and simplify them. So we can appreciate what you're doing because the way you wrote your book is in that way that everybody can enjoy it. Anybody can benefit from it. So we thank you, and we hope to do this again one day.
My pleasure. Thank you all very much, and have a happy Hanukkah.
You too.